Okay, hi everyone. This is Dan Barry, and I'm joined by my colleague Heather Archambault here in Silver Spring. And we have this webinar today on the topic of the FY18 competition for proposals that the MAPP program put out a couple of weeks ago now. This is for fiscal year 2018, and we have 3 competitions this year, and we wanted to have this webinar to talk a little bit about the competitions, provide some information about the program, especially for those who are not familiar with the Modeling, Analysis, Predictions, and Projections program, and to also open the opportunity for questions about submitting proposals or, exactly what we're looking for if it's not clear from what's in the information sheet that we published online. You can find all the info about the competitions on the website. So if you go to cpo.noaa.gov, at the top there's a grants page that you can go to and see the federal funding opportunity, the FFO. And we also encourage you to look at the information sheet. So each program in this office produces an information sheet that provides more details about what the competition is looking for and the different parameters and how to submit, and things like the budget level and other information about high-performance computing. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. So please make sure that you look at both of those documents thoroughly, the FFO as well as the information sheet for information about the competitions and how to apply. So in this webinar, what we're going to do is go through a little bit of background on the MAPP program. I'm going to give that background, and then Heather and I are going to describe the 3 competitions that we have out this year. And Heather will talk about the application process and guidance for how to apply and give some advice on that. And then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for question and answer at the end. So the way that we ask you to do this is to please submit your questions via the chat function in WebEx. That question will just come straight to us. It won't go out to the group of individuals who are on the phone call. And then we'll just go through them in order. And please, feel free as we go along here to just ask questions as they come to mind, and, we'll handle them at the end. It'll actually help us if you ask your questions as they pop into your mind, because we can sort of, figure out, how we're going to take them, what order, and think about responses and whatnot. So please feel free to just shoot us chat messages as we go along here with questions. We do ask that the questions be general interest, so you may be wondering if a particular idea you're having for the call in response to the call for a proposal is relevant, and we ask that you not ask questions like that unless they're sort of general interest in clarifying, in general, an element of the call or the information sheet. We do have this letter of intent process, and that process is intended to provide programmatic feedback on the relevance of your idea. And Heather will talk about that process a little bit more. So please don't ask, proposal-specific questions during the Q&A session. And again, I think I said this already, but we're going to answer the questions in an anonymous fashion, and the attendee list on this webinar is hidden as well. So feel free to ask whatever's on your mind. Okay, so the MAPP program is nestled under a number of different layers in NOAA. We are a part of what's called the Climate Program Office, which is a largely competitive research program that's part of the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research. OAR, as it's known, is one of the 5 major line offices in NOAA. We have this research line office and then other line offices that are focused more on service. There's, of course, the Weather Service, the Fisheries Service, the Ocean Service, and then NESDIS, which focuses on satellites. And the basic idea, of the structure of NOAA is that OAR can provide a lot of the research and development for the rest of the agency and help move along the products and services that the agency provides with the best science. And so, we're really driven in our program to make sure that we're very relevant to the mission of the agency and the different line offices in that respect. So within CPO, there are 3 major buckets, 3 major programmatic areas. There's an observing area, an observing division in the office, and they're focused largely on ocean observations, especially buoy observations. They actually fund infrastructure and place buoys in the ocean. The Informing Decisions division, they're focused on connecting the research that we do and all of the modeling accomplishments to stakeholders and decision makers, and building communities of practice so that these individuals out in the decision-making community have the best information to inform their activities. And then the Earth System Science and Modeling Division, which MAPP is a part of, and this is focused more on the physical science side of this, investigating processes in the climate system, how they function, sources of predictability, figuring out how to model those sources of predictability, and also a significant focus on the chemical components of the climate system, such as the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle. So we're all very much applied. We're very mission-focused. MAPP in particular, we're really looking at, for example, the Weather Service and development in terms of predictions that the Weather Service is producing, bringing new products to the forefront, helping to improve the models and the prediction systems, but also increasingly focused on some of the other line offices like fisheries, like the Ocean Service, and the types of products that we could help develop in those areas as well. And we'll talk about all of this in this presentation. So I've mentioned some of this already in terms of the scope of the program, but we support a spectrum of research activities, anything from sort of exploratory projects that are very mission-driven and applied, but still perhaps upstream of impacting operational activities at NOAA, all the way to transitioning research activities into operations at the agency. So the program runs the full gamut, and we have a vehicle that helps us do these transitions, the Climate Test Bed, which I'll talk about a little bit, and which is one of the 3 calls that we have this particular year. We partner extensively. I've already mentioned the NOAA partnerships. In addition to the other line offices, we, of course, work extensively with the OAR labs like GFDL and ESREL and other labs within the line office, as well as the cooperative institutes very closely. But we also work through these intergovernmental and transgovernmental organizations like the U.S. Global Change Research Program, which is composed of 13 agencies, including NOAA, Department of Commerce, all working on global change research. So NSF, DOE, NASA, all the big agencies are a part of this. And also the U.S. Climate Variability and Predictability Program, CLIVAR, and as well as the National Earth System Prediction Capability Program, ESPC, which is largely a collaboration between the Navy and NOAA, although there are other agencies becoming more involved in this activity. And, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is extend NOAA's capabilities. So the idea of having an office like CPO is sort of an acknowledgement that, NOAA, we're not the be-all, end-all of all of the scientific knowledge and capabilities in the nation and the world. We really need to find ways in a rigorous fashion to engage with the external community and bring the external community together with NOAA staff and scientists and practitioners to extend NOAA's capabilities. So we are very mission-driven, and we function to try to expand the world in terms of what NOAA, interacts with and the type of research that can be harnessed to advance NOAA. So all of our research proposals at MAPP are competitively selected. Most of the funding in the program is competitive, and in terms of the research proposals, we solicit them through these annual federal funding opportunities, which the office puts out, the Climate Program Office. So all the programs and CPOs try to solicit through the same opportunity. And as I mentioned, we kind of run the gamut from more like exploratory research all the way to transition activities. The diagram on the right-hand side of the slide is something that has been floating around at NOAA for the last couple of years. We call it the research and development funnel. But basically, it shows this process of moving from exploratory projects down to transitions towards the bottom of the funnel. And the narrowing of the funnel as you head down is indicative of the fact that not all exploratory projects are necessarily going to result in a transition ultimately. And, that's something we acknowledge, but we also acknowledge that we need to be funding research throughout the funnel because you're not going to get transitions if you're not funding upstream research, and you're not going to get transitions if you're not funding transition research. So we have to really make investments strategically throughout this research funnel. And you can, I think, see pretty clearly, especially in this year's calls, how we're doing that. Each of the 3 competitions really run across this funnel in fairly complementary ways. We have 5 major areas in the program. One of the primary areas is prediction, and at CPO we generally handle timescales that are 2 weeks and longer, so subseasonal and longer timescales. Weather timescale deterministic prediction research is done elsewhere in NOAA and the Weather Service and other programs in OAR. Our primary investments at the moment are in subseasonal to seasonal research. We have a pretty significant emerging focus on subseasonal research, and Heather's going to talk about that a little bit later. We don't have significant investments in decadal research, although it is of interest to the program, but has not been a focus of recent calls. We have a focus on climate analysis, and that can include both reanalysis as well as data assimilation development to some extent. And we do not typically develop reanalysis data sets. What we have historically focused on is advancing some of the methodology that's used to create reanalysis and dealing with issues like jumps in the satellite data records as they're ingested into the reanalysis, or bringing different Earth system components together in the reanalysis, those types of issues. And what we're trying to do there is set the groundwork for future NOAA-produced reanalysis data sets, so that there's a good body of research to advance the products that can be produced in the future. And then data assimilation is a huge element, although that kind of overlaps to some extent with the modeling element that's up here on the slide. But data assimilation is very important to the Weather Service, and is something that there's quite a bit of research, especially upstream research, that has been deemed necessary to really advance NOAA's data assimilation capabilities. And we have a competition this year on that topic that Heather will talk about. Heather's leading that competition, and that's a major element of what the program does as well. We fund climate and Earth system modeling development, and this includes the operational climate models. So the version 2 of the climate forecast system was heavily funded by the Climate Program Office. We fund other elements of Earth system modeling. We've had some climate process teams in this area over the last few years, which were focused on clouds and also ice sheet calving processes. We have projects in applied areas such as drought. We have a multi-year collaboration with the NIDIS program. That's the National Integrated Drought Information System program. That's another CPO component. And we fund projects that help to advance some of the physical science side of what NIDIS does. So advancing the models, specifically the land surface models, advancing the ability to monitor drought and predict drought. So it's sort of an extension of some of the other elements that you see above, but very much focused on the applied area of drought. And we also have some projects that we're selecting from the FY17 call currently that are focused on sea level prediction on seasonal timescales and marine ecosystem prediction on seasonal timescales. So we are interested in broadening the applied element of the program, making sure that the model development and prediction activities are relevant across the NOAA line offices. And then finally, climate projections. We supported a lot of research into the CMIP-5 data set, and there was a task force that developed projections for North America, and there's a CMIP-6 call this year as well, which to some extent is following up on this topical area. And if you go to our website, we have a lot of material in the MAPP web space on the CPO page. You can see all about the types of projects that we funded, the task forces that I'm going to talk about on the next slide, and a variety of other elements. There's a lot of material there if you'd like to learn more about the program and where our interests are, how we operate. I definitely encourage you to visit our webpage. So the task forces are an initiative that we started about 5 or 6 years ago at this point, and they're focused on integrating the different projects and investigators that we fund in particular research areas. So usually a task force will be composed out of a call for proposals in a topical area. There are a number of current and former examples of this. Currently, we have a subseasonal to seasonal prediction task force, which just started last year, or this current year. They're in their first year of activity, and that was based off of a competition we had in FY16. We had a climate reanalysis task force that ended in 2015. Climate Model Development Task Force that was very much focused on the operational side of things, and that ended in 2016. We're currently in our second iteration of the Drought Task Force, and hopefully we'll have a third iteration of the Drought Task Force starting in the fall once we've chosen the projects that were successful from the FY17 call. And then a Model Diagnostics Task Force, and that has been focused on process-oriented diagnostics of climate models and Earth system models to try to improve those models. The Diagnostics Task Force, I'll mention, that's a little bit of a bridge across the projections and the Earth system modeling categories, but it does sort of genetically come out of the projections area and some of the ideas that the CMIP-5 Task Force had. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the climate test bed, especially since we have a CTB call this year. So the CTB is a joint effort between our program and office and the National Centers for Environmental Prediction, and the idea here is to have a bridge program that enables the transition of research from CPO, MAPP-funded projects into operations at the Weather Service and specifically at the National Centers. And historically, it's been focused on model development and prediction system development and also product development, so working very closely with the Environmental Modeling Center and the Climate Prediction Center over at the Weather Service. And what it seeks to do is create an active engagement between the staff at the operational centers and the external PIs that we fund competitively through the program, and to create, a real working relationship there and an ability to actually have funded transitioned research to make sure that that transition is, really a healthy process. An example of this, major example of this from our last call is the subseasonal experiment sub-X, and this came about from an identified need to improve predictions at subseasonal to seasonal timescales, so beyond the deterministic weather prediction and also the weather ensembles, but a little bit shorter time scale than some of the seasonal prediction like CFS and the NMME system, so trying to kind of attack that gap to some extent at the transition space between weather and climate prediction. So we supported this project. It was done entirely through a competitive solicitation. Ultimately, there's these models listed on the screen. So it's actually an international project because Environment Canada is participating as well. And you can see a variety of different types of models. There are operational models, research models. These are run institutionally, but also CCSM is being run by the University of Miami, so it's an academic federal partnership as well. And it's a 2-year project, so right now these groups are all working on running their hindcast simulations, a coordinated hindcast experiment. And then next year, they're going to pivot and start doing real-time forecasts to test out how the system works in real time. And each of these forecast providers will be providing their data in real time. And this data set also is available to the research community to use for predictability work or looking at, the skill of these prediction systems or a variety of other questions. So some other general things about our program. We have, on the order of about 100 projects and usually more than 100 investigators. Some projects have a single investigator. Some projects have many investigators. It depends on the type of project. Usually the investigators that are funded by MAPP publish approximately 300 or more papers per year in general, so very productive research activity. The task forces organize a whole bunch of activity, including special issues and collections and journals. There are also a number of publications that came out of workshops that were organized by task forces or special reports. There was a report, for example, on the California drought that the Drought Task Force put out. That's an example of a special topic that one of the task forces focused on. We do usually see a number of transitions of research into operations each year. Those are all noted on our website, including the recipient organization and some information about the activity or the technology that was transferred into operations. We have a webinar series, which is currently towards the end of its 6th year. This webinar actually is part of that series. We've had tens of thousands of views of the recordings on the website and thousands of attendees to the webinar series. There are a lot of different topics that have been explored, and I encourage you to go back and take a look. They do relate typically to the 5 programmatic areas that we have, but we've also branched out from some of those areas and explored different topics and done partner webinars as well. So there's a really rich library of information and science to check out in the webinar archive. I encourage you to do that. All the recordings are available on YouTube, so they're very easy to watch from a tech perspective. And I've mentioned the reports and workshops as well. So I'm going to pass it over to Heather now. She's going to talk a little bit about the FSAT task force and then also talk about the application process for this year. You go, Heather.
Great. Thanks, Dan. So I wanted to take a couple minutes just to highlight one of the areas that Dan already talked about that we're focusing on in the MAPP program, and that's the subseasonal to seasonal prediction topic. And so Dan mentioned SubX, so that's the transition effort that's really addressing this very urgent need in the next couple of years to fill the gap between traditional weather and more seasonal predictions. And then to complement that, there's also a little bit of a longer-term effort. This is the idea that you need more exploratory research to see what the next advances that can be made in looking at subseasonal to seasonal prediction and advancing that, the next few years out. So this is the work I'm highlighting here, and this is expected to have more of a payoff into operations on a time scale of about 5 years or so down the road when it's finally at the point where it's ready to transition to operations. So the premise here is there's a strong need. NOAA's leading the way in terms of developing this new capability. We just saw the recent passage of the Weather Research and Forecasting Innovation Act, 2017. CPC, the Weather Service, was ahead of even that. In September 2015, started issuing experimental forecasts for weeks 3 and 4 for temperature and precipitation. And the temperature outlooks actually just became operational very recently. So this is a new area for NOAA, and so MAPP made a significant investment in this area in 2016, as Dan has mentioned, both on the transition side but also the exploratory side. And from a whole set of new projects that were funded from that, which include both the climate test bed projects as well as more projects on the research side, there was a new task force that was formed, the Subseasonal to Seasonal Prediction Task Force. This has a 3-year term, and it's based on the whole set of projects. This is a PI-driven effort. It's organized by the MAPP program, but it's really led scientifically by the investigators. So that's Libby Barnes at Colorado State, and then also Paul Diermeyer, Andrea Lang, and Edmund Chang are leading this effort. So I've outlined the goals here. So it's the idea, as I mentioned, we want to advance the capability to model and predict sources of subseasonal to seasonal predictability. So the various ways that the various modes of variability that exist at this time scale, really understanding how to model these is the premise is that if we can better model these, better predict these modes of variability, that can lead to a major advance in our ability to make predictions at this time scale. So that includes a lot of the processes and phenomena that you can see on the right. This is a diagram that the task force put together. There's a lot of information here, and you can spend a lot of time looking at it. But the idea is, on the map, you can see schematically the different phenomena that are being targeted as potential sources of predictability at the subseasonal to seasonal time scale. So you see things like the stratospheric polar vortex, you see Madden-Julian oscillation and ENSO, and how these may drive processes on the short time scale, more towards the subseasonal time scale, Rossby wave breaking and blocking, how that may influence extremes like atmospheric rivers, extratropical cyclones, tropical cyclones, and so on. So what this map is actually showing is not just the processes, but then you can see the underlying light gray curves there, and that actually shows how the projects link, how the different phenomena are linked. So you can see, for example, there's a dashed line between MJO convection and blocking, and then from blocking to atmospheric rivers. So that's just one project that is looking at the link between variability, how the MJO phase may influence blocking, and then how that frequency of blocking may influence where you may have atmospheric rivers and the frequency and intensity of those. So there's a lot of information contained in this feature or in this diagram. And you can also highlight some of the aspects. On this diagram, you can see that the task force is looking at the issue, particularly of how model resolution impacts your ability to predict these various phenomena at S2S timescale, model physics, and in general, the forecast setup. And then an aspect of this is the multi-model strategy that Dan talked about, the sub-X experiment. Key thing to highlight here is this project, this new initiative is really made possible by the fact that there's an international effort, the International S2S Project. So that's a WWRP, WCRP project, and that's providing a database from a whole variety of operational centers across the world. They're providing hindcasts and predictions with a 3-week lag. But it's a brand new database that really makes this type of research possible. So we're really leveraging that international effort and also feeding back onto the work they're doing with this task force. So just to finish out, so it's both a research and transition activity, as I mentioned, and we do have linkages with other programs. And I should say there is a lot of other work now going on in the S2S area within NOAA and across other agencies as well. Okay, so with that, now we'll move into the next portion of the webinar. So this is on our grant competitions. So we have 3 of them, as Dan mentioned. So just some overview information here. So our announcement for this fiscal year was published on May 15th, and it's available. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm advancing on my laptop and not on. Thanks, Neil. About that. So our FFO was published on May 15th, and you can visit our website or grants.gov to read the information there. So the key deadlines here are the letters of intent to our office are due June 28th, and that's specifically for the MAPP program. Those are the deadlines, or that's the deadline, and full applications are due on September 11th. And note that proposals can only target 1 competition. And with that, I will talk about the first competition we have. This is on advancing Earth system data assimilation. So Dan already provided a lot of motivation for this competition. As he mentioned, this has been a data assimilation and reanalysis has been a key focus of the MAPP program. And the purpose of this is to think about NOAA's needs in the context of unified modeling and more of an Earth system approach to modeling and prediction. What can we do on the exploratory side to advance that? So NOAA has cutting edge or has state-of-the-art data assimilation to go along with the next generation unified model that's being developed at NOAA. So this is a 2-pronged or a 2-part competition, or there's 2 focal areas. So the first one is to develop a new methodology or to significantly advance an existing methodology for coupled data assimilation. And this is coupled data assimilation with demonstrable relevance to Earth system prediction and or monitoring needs of 1 or more NOAA line offices. Investigators should strive to work within a unified data assimilation framework when developing this call and make an effort to connect with the incipient Joint Center for Satellite Data Assimilation JEDI effort, or Joint Effort for Data Assimilation Integration. And here, this is, we're looking for a team of proposers, and we're requiring that investigators must be from multiple institutions for this particular target area. And we're strongly encouraging a mix of PIs from universities and from NOAA labs, from NOAA OIR labs. So this is more of a team project, and the funding level is up to $500K a year for up to 3 years. So that's the first part of this call. The second part is you can also target, alternatively target the development of a new or experimental data assimilation-based approach to monitoring products for different components of the Earth system. So for example, the cryosphere, ocean, including biogeochemistry, land surface, or atmosphere composition. For this part of the call, we require that there be we require a NOAA investigator or a collaborator to be on the group of TIs, and the project should demonstrate relevance of the new product to one or more NOAA line offices. And we're especially encouraging the assimilation of climate quality NOAA data and specifically reprocessed satellite-based products that are available from JPSF and associated NOAA archives and data repositories that contain these satellite data and products. There should be specifics about how the products are going to be evaluated, benchmarks and metrics, and like the first targeted area, this is potentially a 3-year project but it's at a smaller funding level of up to $170K per year. And I've listed the contacts below, so I want to point out for information about the JPSS data or that aspect of the project, the second area mentioned here, you can reach out to Lihang Zhou, who is a STAR program manager. And now turn it back to Dan to talk about competition number 2.
Okay, great. Thanks, Heather. So the second competition is focused on the Coupled Model Intercomparison Project, which is entering Phase 6. The modeling centers are currently producing projections according to the framework that was laid out for CMIP. And we're anticipating that this data is going to be available over the next 1 to 2 years, so it's concurrent with the planned 3-year length of these projects. So the idea here is to answer one of the main questions that's been posed for CMIP 6. The question is, what are the origins and consequences of systematic model biases? And this is very nicely related to the activity that the Model Diagnostics Task Force has been working on for the last couple of years at this point. What they've been trying to do is develop process-oriented diagnostics that can tell you something about the source of errors in the models, where the biases are coming from, and provide enough process-level insight that you can think about how to target improvements to the models and test improvements to the models. So this competition is focused on continuing that effort and building on that effort. So there are some requirements listed here. We would like the projects to define pathways for model improvement. So this is kind of important, if anyone on the phone has applied for funding to analyze CMIP in the past. This is a little bit different. We're not looking for just sort of diagnostic evaluation of the models and model performance. We're looking to kind of go beyond that and look at the processes in the models and utilize the CMIP-6 data set to build metrics that can be ultimately utilized to inform model development. So it's kind of taking a step beyond just diagnostic analysis or evaluation and going, a little bit beyond that, developing metrics and getting into the model development, process. So I've mentioned bullet 2 already. In terms of bullet 3, there are a few foci in the competition. So we called out cryosphere, and this can be various elements of the cryosphere. Extremes, some examples of extremes are drought, extreme precip, tropical cyclones, extreme temperatures, heat waves, things like that. So topically, it can be unified around some of those different types of extreme events, and sea level and coastal dynamics as well. So those are the 3 sort of unifying themes, and there are some cross-cutting themes that are called out in the information sheet. There's an acknowledgement that clouds are a huge issue. I know they're very much of interest to GFDL in the CMIP-6 period, and looking at the source of cloud biases and trying to figure out how to make some progress on those in the CMIP-6 time frame. So that's a unifying theme, and also the Arctic as a unifying theme for some of these topics. So there's not much specification beyond that in terms of how to operate within those particular topics and foci areas. We'd be happy to see a variety of different types of proposals, but those are some themes that you can focus on, and you can focus on one or more of those as it's appropriate to your proposal. There are 2 types of proposals. So one of them is sort of the typical type of proposal, 3-year proposal with the funding level of up to $170,000 per year. Those can be single investigators or multiple investigators. And then the other type of proposal is for $500,000 per year, up to 3 years, and that's to do a variety of things, including continuing to work on the metrics framework and developing that, There's a link to a white paper that describes the framework and the activities of the current Model Diagnostic Task Force. To provide leadership for the task force, we would ultimately, form a task force out of these projects, and we expect that this team would help to lead the task force, and also to integrate the individual projects above the 170K per year projects into the overall activity and help them contribute to the framework. So as I mentioned, this can be up to $500,000 per year for 3 years, and there's also in the call some discussion of some of the different constituent MIPS that you may be interested in looking at. So there's the diagram on the right here that shows the model that's being used for CMIP 6, but there are a variety of focused MIPS that may be very useful for interrogating some of these particular questions in the call. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to mention about this. I think that's it for now. There's a lot of information in the call, so please do make sure you consult the information sheet to see, some of the other parameters of what we're hoping for. I guess I did want to mention that, we do like to generally see relevance to NOAA models and collaboration with NOAA modeling centers. It's not a requirement in this call, but we certainly would enjoy seeing collaboration with GFDL in particular here. If it is feasible to collaborate with the National Centers for Environmental Prediction, that's also would be favored to some extent, although it's of course difficult in the CMIP context because they're not a participant. But there could be some branched relationship between, for example, the metrics that are developed and NCEP activities in some cases. So it's something to think about. It's not a specific requirement, but we are a NOAA program. We do like to see relevance to the NOAA modeling centers. So thanks. Oh, and I want to mention something before I pass it back, which is please remember to submit questions as we go along here so that we can start thinking about them, triaging them.
Okay, so I'll talk about the third competition, which is the test bed competition that we have this year. And this is, again, with a focus on operational, subseasonal, and seasonal prediction. And the reason we have this focus is so the climate test bed is driven by the needs of NCEP. This year it's specifically driven by the needs of the Climate Prediction Center. So these are the priorities that CPC has identified. So we're responding to this and providing this call as a way to bring in the external community and get projects that are ready for demonstration and can potentially be transitioned in the next couple of years. So the purpose of this, Dan talked about the test beds, but we're involving the external community in advancing S2S this year, and there are two main foci. The first is testing and demonstrating an experimental prediction methodology or system developed in the broader community for operational purposes. So this could be trying new techniques like new calibration techniques or post-processing techniques. Also new ways of verifying for this S2S timescale, which is very important. And it also could entail experimental multi-model combinations, testing out hybrid statistical dynamical systems, and also merging of systems across timescales. So these are all ways, new ways to target this gap between, or this new area that's beyond weather, but not quite at the seasonal timescale. And I want to call specifically that projects that are seeking to improve the prediction of extremes, those are particularly desirable. That's a really key focus, and there's a desire, I know, to go beyond just coming up with temperature or precipitation anomalies for periods, but really trying to pinpoint when extremes may be possible, and that's all types of extremes. That's certainly of interest. So the second part of this call is improving multi-model ensemble prediction systems, and this is particularly, we're thinking of the North American multi-model ensemble prediction system. By testing and demonstrating the utility of new or higher resolution models, improvements to the forecast initialization, or to upgrades of other aspects of the system. So those are the two areas, and competitions or proposals can focus on one or both of those areas in their project. So for climate testbed calls, there are several different requirements that you have to be aware of. A key thing is the readiness level. The climate testbed accepts projects that are at least at a readiness level of 5, so between 5 and 8. And we with the meaning of each readiness level is described or defined in our information sheet appendix. So please look at that carefully and make sure the project you have in mind is at the appropriate readiness for the climate test bed. And so that's in late stage development or in the demonstration phase. So there are other requirements. We require a co-PI or a collaborator from NCEP, and that's to facilitate the transition process and help the project be ready for operational implementation, ideally, at the end of the project. We require a support letter from NCEP for this project. There also needs to be a explicit part of your project that describes the metrics that you're using, and we ask that you adopt the NCEP metrics that they use for their evaluation of their projects. And finally, a key point is that it's a requirement to submit a signed transition plan with your proposal. So again, as Dan mentioned, it's really important, especially for this one, for all of our calls, but particularly this one, to make sure you've read not just the information sheet and the FFO, but the accompanying information. We do have a handout on specific requirements for the MAPP CTV proposals, and that's linked in the information sheet, so please review that carefully. So these are 2-year projects with funding levels of up to $170,000 a year for 2 years. And Dave DeWitt is the CPC director, but currently he's acting as the climate testbed director, so he's the person to contact about any questions about getting NCEP interest and collaborators for these projects. Okay, so the Climate Program Office review process and funding recommendations. This is described in detail in the federal funding opportunity, so strongly encourage you to look at this, but this is summarized here how we do our review process. So proposals have a 2-stage review that they go through, and it's based on 4 criteria. So the first 3 criteria are addressed in the Stage 1 review, and the last one is in Stage 2. So in the Stage 1 peer review panel, this is going to account for the majority of the score. So this is the part, so the peer review panel is the main factor determining whether or not a project ultimately is funded or recommended for funding. So the peer review considers technical and scientific merit. That's by far the largest weight. And also, the panel considers the qualifications of the team, and finally, the appropriateness of the budget. So then projects undergo a second review, and this is for relevance. So this is a program manager review, and this is assessing how relevant the projects are to the priorities of NOAA and to the program, and ensuring a good balance of different types of projects across a certain topic area. So there is objectives, or there's scoring applied at each of these stages, so in the end there's one final score that's assigned to each application, and this determines the ranking and the funding priority. So we have our score at the end of this process, and then we simply fund down the list until we have no more funds available for the competition. So the selection process, of course, is conditional on the funding availability. We don't know that for sure until we receive our final budget, of course. But in general, historically, about 1/4 of full applications that are submitted ultimately are successful or recommended for funding. And typically, final decisions on proposals are not made till late winter or spring, and this is dependent on the government budget process. Okay, so just some details about once you're funded, what happens as a MAPP PI. So I just want to highlight some opportunities to have exposure to your work. So we do have a webinar series. Of course, this is part of our webinar series. That's an opportunity to present your research to a broad community. Our task forces that Dan mentioned are a great platform for communication with other scientists, and also to establish collaborations in other parts of NOAA and outside of NOAA, even internationally. We do a lot of promotion of our work through climate.gov and other outlets. MAPP PIs tend to have lots of opportunities or to organize and lead sessions at various community meetings. We have a newsletter that we put out quarterly, and that describes recent research findings and accomplishments. And so in addition to those benefits, so I'll just say the reporting requirement, that's a standard saying it's annual reporting is what we require, as well as the final report. Okay, so now we'll finish up with the last portion of the presentation, and this is actually the process of applying. And again, you can find all this information in our FFO, and I'm just going to kind of highlight it here just to provide an overview, but again, you should carefully read the process or what's outlined in the FFO. So just so you're aware of what's in the FFO, so this is where you can find information on the program objectives and priorities. This gives specifics on the expected number, the size, and the duration of the awards for every program, not just MAPP. It talks about eligibility, the elements that are required for the letters of intent, as well as for the full applications. It gives you the deadlines, talks about the application review and selection criteria, which I've already mentioned, and also the award reporting requirements. So, and as Dan has said, along with the FFO are the information sheets that each program provides, and these are really critical. This is going to tell you in detail what the requirements are of the competitions and what we're really looking for. So those are very important to read carefully. Okay, so first the letter of intent process. So Dan already talked about this a bit, but the purpose is for us to provide you with feedback before you go through the process of putting together a full application. Is to give you feedback on the relevance of the idea that you have for the competition, so you know whether you should move forward with submitting a full or preparing a full application. So this is something that we strongly encourage you to do, but it's not a requirement. You can still submit a full application without first submitting an LOI. So the elements that we're looking for in an LOI, you need to, of course, identify which competition you're targeting and which area of that competition as appropriate, what your project title would be, who's involved in the project, of course, the statement of the project, some description of the data or the work to be completed, including methodology and data sets, what you expect the cost of the project to be, and this is the really key thing, the relevance to the competition being targeted. This is a short document, only 2 pages in length, and we highly encourage you to submit that so we can give you feedback. So we'll evaluate every LOI that we get, and we'll get back to you in this year by July 26th with information as to whether your full project is encouraged, marginally encouraged, or discouraged. So if it's encouraged, that means that we found that your letter of intent, your project based on your letter of intent would address all the required elements of the call. If it's marginally encouraged, we noted that it hit some but not all of the required elements, and that if it's discouraged, it's because it did not address required elements of the call. So at this point, we're not evaluating the scientific merit of your work. It's simply an evaluation of relevance. And typically you'll just receive a response as to whether or not it's relevant and not the specifics as to why. But sometimes we will highlight where in the competition some requirements that we want you to be aware of, and that if you are interested in taking into account our feedback and then submitting it, that will certainly point you to how you can refine your project to better suit the competition. So this is the formal process in which we give you feedback as to whether an idea is relevant. So please don't email us for questions about pitching particular ideas, but we're more than happy to answer any questions about our process, or certainly to clarify any aspects of our information sheet or FFO. Okay, so the elements of the application. This is described in detail in the FFO, but this is standard, so title page, there's a specific format that we're looking for there. There's a 1-page abstract, results in the last 3 years of research, of course, a statement of work, data and an information sharing plan, so that's important, and there's also a section for the budget, including the justification, federal forms, and the indirect cost rate agreement. PI should include curriculum vitae and current and pending funding support figures and references, and appendices. Okay, and then I think this is the final slide, just some general guidance. Please be clear about which competition you're targeting and what type of proposal you're submitting, whether it's a team proposal, a larger proposal, or a more focused proposal. Please direct your administrative questions about the FFO to Diane Brown, our grants manager. And note that you can request high-performance computing support through our calls, and we do have details about this in our information sheet. And then finally, there is a new requirement that you have to provide public access to grant or contract produced data, and so please see the information sheet for details on the data sharing plan. So that is our last slide, I believe. Yes. So
great. Yeah, and so we do have a bunch of questions already, and there's still some coming in. So what we're going to do is take about a minute, and we're going to mute the line for a moment. Heather and I are just going to look through the questions and kind of order them, and then we'll come back on and we'll go through and answer them. So just bear with us for a moment while we log off, and we'll be right back and we'll answer all of your questions. Thanks. Okay, so we're back. We, as I mentioned, have a lot of questions that have come in, and we're going to kind of go down the list here and go through them. Really good questions about the competitions and the process. And so I'll take the first one. The first one is asked, does the third bullet have to be related to model improvements and bias corrections? And this is referring to the CMIP 6 competition. So the third bullet of the CMIP 6 competition specifies the focus on cryosphere, extremes, sea level, coastal dynamics, with cross-cutting focus on clouds in the Arctic. And the answer to this question is that, yes, all of these projects have to be related to model improvement. We want to see process-oriented evaluation of the models that are directed towards model improvements. The second part of the question asks about bias corrections, and the idea here is not to correct biases in the model in the sense of correcting biases in predictions or something like that. It's to do model development to try to reduce the bias in certain areas through a process-oriented understanding of where the issues come from. So I hope that helps with this one. The answer is yes. This is meant to be sort of a model development focused call. The second question that we received is ENSO considered extreme? And I think the idea here, so this is also relevant to the CMIP 6 call, I think the idea here is on just a focus on the way the word extreme is being identified in the call. So we're looking for a focus on extreme events. And I guess, ENSO is an unusual condition of the climate system to some extent. But what we're focused on are extreme events that, sort of impact the continental or contiguous United States and Hawaii and Alaska. And so that could involve ENSO, and some of these other topics could involve ENSO perhaps as a teleconnection linkage or a driver of some of the biases. But it's not in particular focused on, for example, trying to improve ENSO variability or magnitude or flavor representation in the models. That's not the focus of this. The focus would be on actually, working on extreme events, basically, so temperature extremes, drought extremes. So again, that may have some relationship to ENSO or be driven by ENSO, but it's not. We don't want to see projects that are just specifically focused on improving ENSO in the models. The next question is, historically, what percentage of LOIs are accepted? It really depends on the competition. One thing is, just kind of on the word accepted, the LOI process, as Heather mentioned, is not binding. So even if your LOI is rejected, you can still submit a proposal. What the LOIs try to do is say, okay, you've given us this brief idea of what you want to do, and it's either bulk relevant or not relevant, and we're trying to, save you from having to write a proposal if the idea is kind of way outside of where the competition is. We are somewhat mindful during the LOI stage of wanting to have a certain acceptance rate on the proposal, so we don't want to have an extremely low acceptance rate on proposals. So we'll try to kind of figure out what percentage of LOIs need to be accepted or not, sort of based on that. But it really is just purely a relevance consideration. So in some cases, I'd say we've rejected 50 to 60% of LOIs, and in other cases, I would say we've rejected 5 to 10% of LOIs. It really depends on the competition, on how much of a stretch proposers are trying to make to fit an idea into the competition, and it's very specific year by year and competition by competition. So there's a lot of variability there. Next question Heather's going to take.
So this next question is, how important is it to include postdoc or student training? So this, in NOAA, I think I can answer this quickly and just say that NOAA, we don't have this as one of our criterion for evaluating proposals. So unlike NSF, where NSF, I believe, does look at that as part of their broader impacts, that's not something that NOAA particularly targets. So there is a portion of the evaluation process that's looking at the team, but in that case, it's really looking at the quality of the team and the ability for the team of PIs to carry out the work. So it's not about the training per se, but of course, talented postdocs and having the appropriate amount of time to do the project is of course important, but training is not a specific thing that we're looking for in our proposals.
So the next two questions are focused on the CMIP competition, and they're both related. One of them is, for this competition, are proposals that will perform their own model experiments in addition to the CMIP 6 suite be looked upon more favorably. And the other question is it necessary to propose modeling experiments to test model advances? So I think these are fairly well related. And just from the information sheet, what we wrote is targeted experiments that extend the CMIP 6-based evaluation for the improvement of models, particularly NOAA-coupled models, may also be proposed. So, it says may also be proposed. It's not a requirement of the call that the proposals have to do their own model runs for the evaluation thrust of the proposal. It's something that may fit into the work plan for some of the competitions, and we do encourage that, but it's not necessarily a requirement of the call. Okay, Heather's going to take the next question.
Okay, the next question is, will the NSF support letter or the identification of an NSF collaborator be a requirement as part of the LOI? So I assume this is for the climate test bed call. So we'll be looking in the LOI to see that all the requirements of the particular call are addressed and are acknowledged. So in this case, we will be looking to see that there is a collaboration there. If we don't see that and we don't see the support from NSF indicated, I mean, we're not expecting to see the support letter included in the LOI, but we do want to see that NSF is interested and that there is a collaborator in mind there, and that will affect how relevant we deem the project to be.
Okay. The next question is, I think, probably on a lot of folks' minds. So this person asks, can you talk about how the current funding environment is likely to affect the MAPP program? How likely is it that funding will be available, particularly given the uncertainty in the FY17 awards? So first of all, there isn't actually a lot of uncertainty in the FY17 awards. We, have a budget that has come through the agency. We're still making decisions about those final, where the final cut line is, but in large part, the budget for this particular fiscal year that we're in right now was not impacted significantly in NOAA and in this office and in our program, although we're still waiting for final numbers. So there hasn't been a huge amount of uncertainty in FY17 aside from the fact that it is very late in the decision process compared to normal years. So in terms of the future year, we're basically operating under the idea of our current year appropriations, which are essentially flat and comparable to the last few years. We, like you, have seen the presidential budget plan for the next fiscal year, and there are proposed budget reductions for the office, some of which could potentially impact the MAPP program under the presidential plan. But we don't know anything more about that at this time, and of course the budget process is a very complicated back and forth between the agencies, the executive branch, and Congress, and I don't think anyone really knows exactly how that's going to turn out at this point. So we do not have guidance at this point on the FY18 budget. We, as you can tell, are holding calls as normal for FY18, and we're going to go through the process as much as possible until we receive any news that we may not be able to fund proposals. But, I would say just stay tuned to the news and you'll learn as much as we really know. If you want to see information about the NOAA budget, NOAA does publish a public version of the budget called the Blue Book, and you can search for FY18 Blue Book and you can see what was proposed for the fiscal year 18 budget for NOAA and, get a sense of how it impacts the Climate Program Office. So it's very hard to provide guidance, but we are going ahead with the competitions and we'll continue to do so until there's any, other information that's available. Okay, next question. I have a question on competition 2, which is the CMIP 6 competition. Suppose I find the source of one of the systematic model biases among CMIP 6 models. Which model do you prefer to be used to improve model performance? Only GFDL model is preferred, or other models such as CESM are also okay? Thanks. So this is a good question. I kind of mentioned this when I went over the competition that, we certainly do like to see advances in the NOAA modeling suite, so a collaboration with GFDL would certainly be encouraged. However, you can focus on other modeling systems or, like CESM, for example, or the NASA models. I think the idea here is that these metrics could be broadly useful to a variety of modeling centers, and our hope is that the framework that's been developed could potentially be extended to other modeling centers and modeling platforms, particularly as part of this competition. So, the GFDL focus would certainly be valued if you can make a collaboration there or propose a collaboration there, but it is not explicitly a requirement of the CMIP 6 focus call. So Heather's going to handle the next couple of questions.
Okay, so the next question is, do we have to indicate possible or certain NOAA partnerships at the LOI stage? So this is a bit similar to the question I addressed earlier, but I think it's slightly more general than just targeting the kind of test bed call. So this one, for the competitions that we require NOAA partnerships, and we specified the need to have a NOAA collaborator, that sort of thing, we will certainly be looking for that in the LOI, that has been acknowledged, that you're aware of that requirement and have ideas in mind. And as Dana said, and I mentioned earlier, this is non-binding, and we understand that things evolve certainly between the time that you're developing a 2-page idea for your project and a full-fledged, proposal or full application. So we will just try to give you feedback based on the information you provide as to whether it's on target for what our call is. So certainly the more information you have about partnerships or the more assurance you can provide that you will be able to meet those requirements, the more likely it is that your project will be encouraged for a full application. Okay, so the next question is, will this webinar be available online, and is the document available online? So some of you, or most of you, are probably familiar with our MAPP webpage. We have a specific page on our website, our MAPP website, that archives all of our webinars, including this one. So you should be able to find that. I think it's also included in the email announcement that we sent out, but you should be able to find our webinar page, and as soon as we can download the recording and post it online, we will have it online. So you'll have not just the slides, but actually this recording available as well. Okay, so the next question is, Do we need to submit a transition plan with the LOI? Okay, so that's not required at the LOI stage, but certainly that is something that is required for the full proposal, so that's something that it's good to think about and prepare for. But yeah, the transition plan is certainly not required at the LOI stage. It's only a 2-page document. All right, so we're still getting questions in, so I'm just going to take a look ahead.
Yeah, and there's a question that I might take right now.
That'd be great. And I can
and Heather can take a moment to look at these other questions.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I got one question on the CMIP 6 call. They said, please clarify what types of activities constitute pathways of model improvement. You mentioned processes and process-oriented many times. What is a process-oriented metric versus a non-process-oriented metric and model improvements? So for this question, I would really encourage you to check out some of the links in the competition and also on the website. We have some documents that do a nice job defining exactly what process-oriented metrics mean and constitute. But the idea here, to kind of go back a little bit, is that process-oriented metrics are moving beyond the type of diagnostics that are typically used in model intercomparison projects, where you're looking at standard fields like Z500 or U200, precipitation, temperature, things like that, and really getting at elements of the model formulation that can tell you something about where the errors are coming from in the model code and perhaps in parameterizations. So, one of the things some of the projects have been focused on extensively in the current task force is like the moist static energy budget, for example, where you're getting down to the level of the physics that is potentially responsible for some of the biases that are observed in those metrics like Z500 or some of the other metrics that I mentioned. So it's really going beyond, just diagnostic evaluation and developing these metrics that are informed by processes that may be responsible for some of the biases in the model. So I hope that helps, and I would encourage you to, check out some of the documents on the website, some of the things that are linked in the information sheet, because there is more information on this in there. So, please check that out. If you still have questions, feel free to contact me if you'd like a little bit more discussion on this. I'm happy to talk to you a little bit more about it.
Okay, so the next question is for the DA-related call on monitoring products. So that's the second objective of the first competition. So the question is whether data assimilation experiments for uncoupled components, for example, land surface only, are those relevant? Yes, so that's what's being targeted by the second objective. The first one is specifically focused on advancing coupled data assimilation, but the second objective is developing new approaches to monitoring for specific aspects of the Earth system, not without the requirement that the data assimilation be coupled. So these can be just data assimilation for the cryosphere, ocean, land surface, et cetera. So yeah, that would be relevant. Okay, so the next question is, we are already involved in, I think this is the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation forecast contest that lasts until next May. Can we apply for the third competition? So I guess the thing to consider here is, so these are for the climate test bed. This would be transition projects with the idea that they would be potentially suitable for operations at CPC. So this is a different focus, and maybe the biggest thing to keep in mind of all is that we do want to see that anything that would be funding is not duplicative, is not already being funded elsewhere or supported elsewhere. So I think the key is to have this, anything you propose should be a clearly, a distinct project that's not already being supported elsewhere. And I think that's, without knowing more information about what's being proposed, I think that's as much as I can say to answer that question.
Okay, I'll take the next one. There was a question, in terms of analyzing CMIP 6 extremes, is it okay to focus on multiple global regions rather than just the U.S.? There's nothing in the call specific to this. We did not specify a domestic focus for extremes. I think, if the analysis is global and it's generalizable, or if it's regional and it's generalizable, that would probably be okay. We, of course, NOAA is principally interested in being able to improve the simulation and forecasting of extremes within the United States and outlying territories. So, you know, it's good, I think, to try to prioritize that in terms of the extremes focus. However, you know, a lot of the processes can be similar from region to region, so I think if you want to focus on other regional extremes, it would be good to frame that in more of a generalizable manner, if that makes sense. So, you know, we're not explicitly saying that it has to be just domestically focused, but we do generally appreciate that in proposals to the program because of the mission element of what we need to deliver to NOAA. But of course, you know, science does not know boundaries necessarily, and so, you know, of course, for some of these problems, it'll be suitable to consider extreme activity in other, you know, parts of the regional climate system or the global climate system in different regions.
So the next question, I think, we weren't totally sure what it was intended by this, but I think I understand maybe the general question, which is about, the question is basically about, I think, demonstrating past collaborations, actually, maybe I'm not sure what this is. So the question is about sub-seasonal work that I think has been published or presented at recent, or at 2 recent workshops. So do these count as collaboration? So I was first interpreting this through as demonstration of collaboration with NCEP partners, and so the way I was going to answer that was to say we're not looking so much for past projects or past collaborations, but specific, how you would specifically collaborate with someone at NCEP in the future. So I think I'll just probably, hopefully that was what's meant. Feel free to send in a question to refine that if I didn't actually address or interpret your question correctly.
Great, and then we have one more question. It's on the CMIP 6 call. Do we have to indicate if the relevant CMIP 6 runs will be made available at the time of LOI submission? And from the information sheet, it says, if using data from a particular MIP experiment, the proposal should demonstrate that this data is expected to be available at a time in line with the proposed project work plan. So, so the answer is yes, you should make that clear. You know, it's a little bit complicated, of course, with CMIP because some of the MIPs may be farther ahead than others by the time the projects start. We also have historically had, you know, issues with the timing of CMIP data in terms of funding research. Because of the way our calls work, of course, we kind of need to get the project set up, oftentimes around the same time or even a little bit before the data becomes available. So if there are delays, that can have a significant impact, of course. So it would be good if you are going to be focused on a satellite MIP that does not have a clear public time schedule and deliverable to discuss that in the proposal and indicate you know, some sense of how the availability of that data will mesh with the anticipated start date and end date of the project. You know, there are some ameliorating circumstances where we can do no-cost extensions for projects beyond their end date, at least for grants, up to as much as 2 years. So in situations where, you know, there's something externally that's impacting the activity on an award, there can be an extension where the funds can be spent down later. And, you know, that may be something that comes into play for projects like this that are dependent upon external timelines. But we did kind of plan this competition, having talked to some of the CMIP 6 organizers and getting a sense of when things are going to be coming online. And we got the sense that it would mesh fairly well with the DEC experiments and also with a lot of the constituent MIP experiments. So you know, hopefully there's good parallelism between the projects and the availability of the data. But you should definitely talk about that in the proposal and do your best to perhaps reach out to the project organizers. And I imagine most folks have seen these papers, but there are a series of really excellent papers in one of the EGU journals on each of the MIP experiments, and that gives you an idea of perhaps, you know, people you can reach out to if you don't already know someone who's involved in one of the MIP projects. So I think that's it. I'm going to check one more time and see if there are any other questions. Okay, there's nothing else. So I just want to thank everyone for logging into the webinar. I wanted to extend Anna-Rita's apologies that she's not able to be on the webinar today. Anna-Rita Mariotti is the director of the MAPP program, and she had a travel conflict with this, unfortunately. But hopefully this was really useful, and feel free to send Heather questions on the data assimilation and climate testbed competitions, and send me a question on the CMIP 6 competition. And just to reiterate what Heather said, if you have general questions about how to apply in the process, please send those to Diane Brown. And then finally, as Heather mentioned, this recording will be available online. We'll probably be able to get it up in the next couple of days if you would like to go back and hear any of the responses to the questions or see anything that was in the slides. And we can also put up a PDF of the slides as well. So thanks a lot for joining. We really hope that this was useful to be able to talk through the competition and the process. And thank you so much for joining and staying on a little bit past the intended ending of the webinar. So thanks a lot. Okay, bye.